Welcome, welcome. It is 12 o'clock on Wednesday, and my name is Joya Das. For about 20 years, I'd say, I was a news anchor here in New York City. I covered the financial markets from the floor of the stock exchange. But for 10 of those years, I've always had the Women's Leadership Lab, where I'm really arming you with tools that I wish that I had when I was first starting a business. So today, I want to tell you that we're speaking to Amanda Natividad, who is VP of a company called SparkToro, VP of marketing there. And Amanda, we're going to be talking about how to build an audience. I host events all the time. I host all kinds of things all the time. And people are always looking to get new clients, to get in front of new audiences. And so I feel like a piece of that is what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you for having me, Joya.
I'm a big fan of story. So I would like to start there. Tell me about you and how you ended up at SparkToro.
Oh, gosh. Well, starting from the very beginning, briefly, I too have a journalism background. I
Oh,
start, yeah, more so in online journalism.
yeah.
I worked for some of the original tech news blogs like paidcontent.org and gigaom.com.
Hmm.
This was many years ago. And then I pivoted into marketing a couple years later, kind of by way of food. Um,
Mm.
I had gone to culinary school to the Cordon Bleu because I thought I was going to become a food writer, a world-renowned food writer, but I did not do any research in the industry
Mm.
and didn't realize until later that there are very few food writing jobs. But that ended up being a good thing because that was how I discovered content marketing, and
Mm.
from there grew my marketing career. But as for getting to SparkToro is an audience research startup started by Rand Fishkin and Casey Henry, formerly of Moz. And what we do is we help people conduct audience research at scale.
Hmm.
And I got connected to Rand, my boss, by way of building an audience online. So this was probably just over about a year ago or almost a year ago that I joined SparkToro, and it's been pretty great ever since.
And to clarify for our audience, your zone of
Mhm,
genius when you say you built an audience is
mhm.
Twitter, right? Are there any other platforms, or would you say that some of the principles we're going to talk about today apply to LinkedIn or apply to Instagram or apply to other places?
Mainly Twitter, yes, and somewhat on LinkedIn. I think what we will talk about today will apply mainly to Twitter and LinkedIn, less so on the more visual platforms like Instagram and TikTok.
All right, so let's dig into it. And I want to remind you to please put questions, audience, in the chat. And I'm going to start asking those as soon as we get through our top 5 or 6 points here. So, Amanda, why does the world need more women specifically to create and publish online?
Because we deserve and we need more representation. I think, and there will never be enough women creators or women thought leaders out there. I guess the way I see it is, and forgive me, this could be, also my own bubble, right? We all kind of have our own little bubbles or industries in which we work and exist. But I just feel like in the circles of marketing and technology, when people ask, or when you think about who are some of the people you pay attention to in this space, who are some of the
Yeah.
thought, for lack of a better term, thought leader, I would venture to guess that most of the time people are thinking of men.
Mm.
And now, does that mean there are more men creators than women creators? I don't know, right? I don't know how that actually shakes out. But I do feel like there is this feeling of it's as though there tend to be more men than women. And so I would love for more women to share their expertise, put themselves out there because we deserve that representation.
When I think about, as you were saying that, when I think about the people I follow on Twitter, they are male. And I'll tell you why. It's that I am not a fluffy person. I'm very like black and white to the point, and I love people. The people that break through for me are very to the point. So I feel like there's a teaching moment here for women that want to be on the same level of the Justin Welches of the world or the Josh Spectors of the world that I'm following. How do they get on that key, or do they even want to? Do you even want to?
That's a really great question because I'm not sure that they want to. I mean, I again, forgive me here, but
Yeah.
I if I were to speak in kind of broad generalizations, of course everybody is different, each unique person is different. But in broad generalizations, I tend to think that the way men and women use social media as a platform
Hmm.
is very different, right? I feel like very generally, men tend to use it for I'm going to build an audience, therefore, I am going to talk about my expertise in this industry. I'm going to stick to that and then grow my audience from there. Pretty straightforward in a way.
Hmm.
Um, but I think when women are posting on social media, using that as a platform for their voice, I think women tend to not seek so much status as men do, but tend to seek community and connection. And I
Mm.
think when you're seeking community and connection, you don't think about, oh, I'm just going to tweet about my expertise. You think about, like, I'm going to tweet about the things that matter to me. It could be work one day, it could be family, it could be life, it could be health, it could be love. And I think that makes it such that when a complete stranger might find either of these online presences, male, men, women, whatever, um, and if somebody is start thinking, I really want to find people who tweet specifically about B2B software companies,
Hmm.
then I think they're more likely to find a man who is tweeting about that niche very regularly, right? So that person might think, oh, I'll follow this guy. He tweets about this often,
Right.
but it doesn't mean that there are no women in B2B software. It might just be that they are not as easily searchable in that specific way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But before I leave that topic, we're on
Mhm.
LinkedIn, obviously. So, how does that translate to LinkedIn? Someone yesterday said that they needed more information on the medical drone space. And they didn't want somebody who's a drone playing in the medical space. They wanted a medical professional who's experimenting with drones, right? A very
Mhm.
specific niche. She's like, so who do I connect to? And somebody else said, well, I would recommend following people on LinkedIn because people will comment and you'll start to get into the universe.
Mhm.
So, translate what you just said to LinkedIn.
Yeah. So for LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn in particular is a very unique opportunity for all types of creators because for one, it is the only social platform where you can find people based on their job industry, job title, and location. Right? It's the only social network where we know where people are putting their job titles willfully. And so you can find people based on that. So there's that. And there's also still greater demand for content than there is supply of content. And so
Mm.
what that means for creators is that your content ultimately has a longer shelf life. So if you're posting about something, more likely than not, that post will continue to get engagement for maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. On
Mhm.
Twitter, that kind of engagement, if you're lucky, like if something goes viral, it might last a week. But the average tweet, the shelf life is maybe like 24 to 36 hours.
Right.
The other thing I would say about LinkedIn is what's also unique about it as a social media platform is you start out with more of a built-in audience, right?
Mhm.
So when you start on Twitter, the following is asynchronous, right? You can join Twitter and have 0 followers, and you could be following tons and tons of people. But on LinkedIn, that is a place where people are looking to connect with other people kind of regardless of industry, right? Like I'm connected with friends and family who are other corporate workers or blue collar workers who we don't work in the same industry, but we're still connected because we know each other in real life and things like
Mhm.
that. So I should look up the statistics, but I would venture to guess that when you join LinkedIn and you set up your profile and you add your friends and connections, when all is said and done, you probably have a few hundred or maybe 100 connections. Twitter isn't really like that, right? So because LinkedIn is that way, it means that you have more of a built-in audience when you start posting. You have
Mhm.
more people who are there to maybe they don't know about B2B software or whatever it is you might be writing about, but they do know you and they support you and your work. So they might be willing to like or comment in support of you as a person.
Got it. Right. So you built an audience of one, and a year later, you had an audience of 60,000. Did you start with who you're going to go to market talking about? In other words, your riches are in your niches, right? Did you narrow in on that first?
I did, yes. And for me, it's It sort of boiled down to I only write about the things that I know well because I only write about what I'm comfortable writing about. So it's what I have lived, what I have experienced, things that I have studied or analyzed for a long time. That's just my personal style. And in doing so, most of my marketing expertise lies in content marketing and a
Mhm.
little bit of kind of brand or PR. So that's kind of where I stuck with, or have stuck with for the past year because that's what I know best. And I think in so doing, it made it clear what people would get from following me. Like they would
Mhm.
know, oh, this. I mean, I never said, "Hi, I tweet only about content marketing." However, if anybody were to look at my feed, and especially over a year ago, that person would see, oh, this, Amanda talks mainly about content marketing, a little bit of marketing strategy. Okay, I know what I'm in for. That's the kind of content I want to see, so I'll follow her. Or
Mhm.
not, right? Or maybe they don't want that, so they don't follow me. But it kind of makes it such that it's easy for the audience to self-select whether or not they want my content.
Now, did you get even more niched down from that? Because I went through this exercise when I thought about my audience. And so it wasn't enough for me to just say women executives or senior leaders. I
Mhm.
had to go one step further and say it was women leaders or senior executives who are at a critical inflection point in
Mhm.
their career. They need something in the way of support or communication skills. And that is who my sweet spot is. So, did you even go that niche?
I'm trying to think. In some ways, yes. In some ways, I did. And it's partly because if you keep writing about producing content about what you know, you have to keep thinking about more ideas. Like, well, what else is there? So, a couple of times I've gotten, more niche with some of the content marketing topics I tackle. Like, I've written content about, like, blog posts and Twitter threads about writing effective case studies.
Hmm.
That's pretty specific. Or effectively managing a video production agency, things like that are pretty niche with regards to content marketing.
All right. So then how did you drill down on your why? Because that's the
Mhm.
next step in building that 60,000 person audience.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I had one first false start with audience building, and it was I had joined an SEO and content creation agency called Growth Machine.
Hmm.
And the founder of the company, Nat Eliason, was the face of the brand. He had built his audience over the years, and then started his own agency. And so people who knew Growth Machine knew Nat. And when I joined, the goal was to have another person also be the face of the brand and to help scale the company from there. And so that second face was me. And that was when I started to grow the audience. And I had relaunched the company podcast, published more so on the blog. And then I was thinking, okay, the first goal that I had was how can I bring in pipeline or grow the pipeline and bring in leads for our business? That was the first goal. But then over the months, I was there for like almost a year, and was starting to think about next steps of my career. And then at that point, it became my next goal, which I think will be more relatable to people here,
Hmm.
is I wanted to not have to do a traditional job hunt ever again. I
Mm.
had it over the years of my career, I'd experienced, you know, choosing fun employment, right? When I was in a career pivot, I've been laid off, furloughed, or even just miserable in a job where I wanted to move on to the next thing, but wasn't really equipped to be in a position of power to just choose my next job. So what I
Hmm.
wanted to create for myself was I wanted to create some personal leverage and create more opportunity for myself so that whatever I do next in my career, I can more so choose it versus, you know, uploading my resume into a job portal and crossing my fingers.
Yeah. So that was your why.
Mhm.
But what was your process of getting down to that? Or did you just share that with me already?
Yeah, well, the process was then it became, it was being a lot more purposeful with what I was posting on Twitter.
Hmm.
And by that I just mean I really came to think of Twitter or posting there as my water cooler at work.
Hmm.
Um, and I say that because what I mean there is I don't mean that I only talked about marketing. It wasn't that. It was I saw it as this is my water cooler of other marketer or where I can talk to other marketers about marketing, work, corporate life, things like that, things related to work. And so I was able to really bring my whole person self to that. And, I tweeted and still do mainly about marketing, a little bit about tech, working at a tech startup, but also, funny anecdotes from being a mom, having a
Yeah.
kid, having a toddler.
I think
Um,
I hear one in the
do you
background.
hear?
Yeah.
Dang it, be quiet. But
It's not in
tweet.
my house, I know that much.
Hopefully he's quiet now. But yeah, so I, tweeting about having a toddler, tweeting about cooking because I'm still passionate about food, and some of these things that are more reflective of who I am as a person. And these are all things that I would be comfortable sharing in a workplace. So I think a key thing here is that when you're building a personal or building a following, it isn't about just only tweeting about your expertise and only that. You could bring in your other interests or your other passions too. It's sort of like what you would talk about comfortably at work during lunch with your coworkers.
Right. All right. So I laid out a strategy for one of my mastermind members yesterday. And I said, I think that when you're first starting out, let's just say ground zero, you maybe have to post 2 to 3 times a day. Do you think
Mhm.
that that thesis holds? And folks, I would love for you to start putting your questions in the chat. I'm going to definitely ask them to Amanda as soon as we get through these points. But I'm going to start looking out for those too. So, yeah,
Mhm.
what's the cadence at which you typically would suggest people posting, either on LinkedIn or on
Mhm.
Twitter?
Um, I post daily or so, once a day, but I do think 2 to 3 times a day works too. I know
Mhm.
that there's some people even recommend posting 7 times per day and kind of seeing what sticks. Um, the way I see it is I try to focus on very high signal to noise. And
Mm.
so I'll take the time to spend an extra 10 minutes or so drafting a single tweet, just making sure it's, phrased clearly, doesn't have typos ideally, and things like that. Um, and what I think if someone is, wanting to grow their community and grow their following, I think it's also important to spend time leaving comments on other people's tweets or LinkedIn posts. So
Yeah.
the way I kind of see it is like, LinkedIn and Twitter, I see it as a sort of it's like a big party, right?
Mhm.
When you arrive at someone's party, you don't just walk in and start shouting over everyone and saying, "Here are the things I want to talk about." You kind of join some like smaller conversations, you introduce yourself, you contribute to those conversations, and then as you feel more comfortable and as things feel more relevant, then you start creating your own conversations and people join yours. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah.
So I would say, um, I post daily on Twitter. Sometimes I skip weekends because I take a break on weekends. And then for LinkedIn, I think daily is ideal. But because content has that longer shelf life there, I think even a couple times per week is also good.
Now, when it comes to the commenting piece, how
Mhm.
long would you spend? I read somewhere that some person spends 1 hour every day adding value, to your point about the party,
Mhm.
walking into circles where there's conversation already underway and starting to add value there. And then
Mhm.
eventually you're seen as the nucleus of a certain kind of knowledge, so people will start to come to you. But how much time would you recommend spending on engagement and adding value in that way each day?
Hmm. It's hard to put a specific time limit on it, but I would say I would say spend at least twice as much time commenting as you do creating your own
Mm.
original posts.
And why is that? I
Mhm.
think that that piece is lost on a lot of people.
Yeah. So even one way to look at it, you could look at it as an impressions or numbers game, where if you are still growing your social media following, and maybe you don't have a ton of followers yet, then that means that you're not going to get a lot of impressions on your content because
Mhm.
there aren't a lot of people following you. But if you comment on other people's tweets, that's sort of a way to increase your impressions at scale, right? You
Mhm.
could comment on one person's tweet and that person has 1,000 followers. Okay, that could be theoretically 1,000 people who would see your reply. Or you can comment on the tweet of somebody with 50,000 followers, 100,000 followers. Um, I don't think too deeply into how many followers someone else has, but I think about it as, okay, here are potentially unique or discrete new people to who can be reached by my message. So that's kind of how I would think about that,
Mhm.
and think about it as like you could look at it as a boost impressions game, and you boost your impressions by getting seen in other conversations versus only being on your own profile.
And when you comment on somebody else's LinkedIn, just to
Mhm.
bring it back to the LinkedIn platform, you're going to see, not only is your audience going to see that, but their audience is going to see that. And so it's a little bit of two for one.
Exactly.
All right, I want to go back to the building of this to 60,000. You had to redefine your audience building goals. What does that mean?
Um, I mean, for when I first started out, it was, I was an employee at a company and was thinking more so about company goals.
Mhm.
And then as that kind of evolved, or as, I kind of grew in the sort of audience building function, I started to also think about, well, what do I want out of this? Because it hadn't really occurred to me to think about what I would personally want from it. And that
Mhm.
was kind of how I got to my personal why. Like, what is all this for? And what does this lead up to? And so then it became, I just want to empower myself with my career.
Mhm.
And that became the new North Star. Um, I think, and that was, how in doing that, that was how I got to know Rand Fishkin, my current boss. He followed me back on Twitter. I was thrilled and mortified that now he was seeing my tweets. But then from there, we became friends in real life, and then I ended up joining SparkToro, and I in a very untraditional kind of way. And it's it was an experience. It has been an experience that I'm very grateful for. And so once I felt like I kind of achieved that goal of not having to do a traditional job hunt, I've been thinking more about, well, what's my next goal? And as I think about that, I think, one goal that I do have is having conversations like this, wanting to connect with more people and wanting to help and empower more women to kind of adopt similar goals for themselves and help them figure out their own personal leverage. And hopefully, my one of my hopes is that some people will see what I have built, and will some women will see what I've built and think, I want that for myself too. And I would love that. And I would love to support other women creators like that.
Folks, I want to encourage you to put your questions in the chat. I'm going to be asking Amanda. Amanda's going to be taking your questions live as soon as we finish our conversation here. So, when you think about the when I think about where I see women get really tripped up is like, oh my God, creating content every day, that's such a heavy lift. There's an argument that you can sit down in one sitting and batch create content for a month, a
Mhm.
week, 2 weeks. So, how do you define and create your content strategy?
Yeah. So I have done that before. I think I was doing that about a year ago. I was drafting some content, doing it week over week. So like on Fridays or so, I would draft the following week's content. So one tweet per day, and or one Twitter thread per week.
Mhm.
And that was kind of how I managed that. Um, and that kind of helped me think about, okay, cool. So the kind of content buckets that I'm going to talk about are content marketing slash marketing. That's the main one. Um, Corporate life or people management, like company culture stuff, and then fun stuff like family slash food. So the main content was the marketing content. So I'd
Mhm.
focus on that. And then maybe on the weekend I would post, a fun anecdote about my parents or things like that. Um, but today it looks a little bit more different. I think, because I've been able to grow the following, and now um I have less of a planned cadence of content, and now it becomes more like I kind of treat it as mini blog posts for the day. Like,
Mhm.
what are the things on my mind today? Like, was there something in my work day that I'm really excited about, or that I'm frustrated by, or, something that can become uh, a thought, like a mini kind of, 180 character, 200 character blog post that will help provide value to someone else maybe experiencing a similar pain point or a similar level of excitement about something.
So, do you still sit down on a Friday and map out your strategy for the week, or is it more ad hoc?
It's more ad hoc, but what I will do is if I have an idea for something, I will go ahead and draft it and probably just leave it in my Twitter drafts, and
Mm.
I'll just get the thought out there even if it's not fully fleshed out. I just start it there, and then I kind of leave it be for a little while, like, just to half forget about it so that, like, I can come back to it in the next day or a couple days or a couple weeks from then and revisit the thought with a fresh perspective after having some distance from it. So it does help to just write out my ideas and save them somewhere and
Mhm.
then just come back to it later. And, maybe I refine the thought and publish, or I just delete it because the moment has passed.
Yeah. Gail Johns wrote a fantastic article in Medium about a writing system. And so he
Hmm.
believes in like one stage being where the ideas just get put in a parking lot, whether it's a notebook or otherwise. Then to your point, there's a second stage where you pull one of those ideas and draft it out, not fully fleshed out, but you're workshopping it. And then the third sort of activity is, and it's not all in the one same sitting, that you are revising it so that you put it out to the world. And that system can be much more effective than thinking you're going to just birth the child, conceive the child, and all of the stuff in between in one sitting.
Yeah. I should adopt a better system though.
So, before we go on to the next point, which is how to deal with trolls, when you look back on your 2000 follower self, what are some of the things that you wish that you could have told her?
Hmm. I think I would have just told her to. Well, one thing I would say when I look back at some older threads that didn't perform as well as I'd hoped, um, I go back to I can now see some of the flaws. Like, oh, I didn't I this well, when you're writing a Twitter thread, it's important to make sure that each tweet within that thread has a valuable or kind of standalone insight so
Mhm.
that each tweet theoretically becomes retweetable.
Mhm.
And I've written some past content where I've put too much context behind stuff where it kind of slows down the progress of the insights and it
Mhm.
makes it just kind of a slog to read. So I would say that I would tell that kind of past me to review some best practices in direct response copywriting
Mhm.
and consider using those insights to better inform the way that I wrote. And then just focusing on delivering the value that I intended to provide.
So, for anyone here who wants to unlock the secret sauce, if you will, how do you get to 60,000?
Um, let's see, commenting on other accounts' tweets, especially the ones who are bigger than your account. Um, trying to optimize for writing viral threads, right? I go back to threads because the beauty of them is they're like these short blog posts where you are taking enough time to shed some light on a specific topic or getting a little bit deeper into a specific topic. And it's also short enough where usually these threads, right, they're shorter than the average blog post. So it's not about turning 1,000 words into a thread. It's maybe more like, what can you say that is defensible in 200 words or so?
Mhm.
And I think when you can achieve that, right, if that thread goes viral or it gets a high amount of engagement, you're sort of proving why you're worth the follow, right? If you can write a thread about, marketing strategy that gets a lot of traction, kind of becomes defensible for your story, right? It becomes like, oh, this person is knowledgeable about marketing, therefore I trust them and I'm going to follow them. Um, and then I would also say, treat it like a dinner party where you are welcoming new people, introducing yourself to new conversations, and focusing on adding some kind of value to whatever conversation it is you start or join. And the value can be providing professional intel or like expertise, or it could be entertainment. Entertainment is value.
Mhm.
um, Focusing more on the who you're writing for and what they will get out of your content versus tweeting
Making
about what
money.
you just feel like writing about.
Yeah. Right. Like, no, I mean, at the bare minimum, no one really cares about you, but they do care about what they can get from the knowledge that you're putting out there. And I think
Mhm.
that's probably one of the biggest mistakes people make is that it's all about me, me, me. But really, what are you saying and what are you doing in service of your audience? Can you talk about that
Yeah.
for a second?
Oh gosh, I completely agree. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like, oh, you are only there to provide value, but it's a little bit of that. I mean, if you are thinking about it as wanting to build a larger community at scale, you can't do that just by talking about yourself and your random thoughts or like what you ate for lunch. It's about like, well, why would people want to connect with you? And it could be by way of, your expertise, could be by way of your writing style, or the humor that you provide, whatever it could be. But I do believe it needs to be valuable in some way.
All right, let's talk about trolls because there's always going to be those folks that don't agree with your viewpoint. Social media makes it very easy to hide behind some other avatar and to start posting, and you never are none the wiser because you don't know who it really is. How do you deal with the trolls? How do you deal with the hate mail?
I mean, one thing I'll say is I think because I have focused on writing about what I know well and what I have experienced and, the things that I've studied for a long time, I don't see trolls too often. Um, so one thing I would say to anyone watching right now is they are a little bit more rare than you might think or than you might fear because I was on Twitter for 10 years before I ever actually tweeted anything
Mhm.
of substance because I was just terrified of people coming out of the woodwork to be hateful for no reason. So I will say those instances are pretty rare. Um, so there's that. But as far as dealing with them, I think it's on one hand, it's a good sign because if you create content that is very high engagement that a lot of people are liking and sharing, then and you get a little bit of some troll action there, I think it means that you've struck a chord. And that's a
Mhm.
good thing. You elicited a reaction in someone or you stirred up an emotion. It's a good thing because it means you're onto something, right? But also, um, I would say that to deal with them, ignoring them goes a long way.
Mhm.
Like, just ignoring the comment and, just moving on from it. I think now you can downvote on Twitter, so you could downvote it and just move on.
Mhm.
I think a best way to I think when in doubt, it's best to just ignore. Um, I don't even hide replies anymore. I think I just ignore them if I feel like it's hateful in some way. Um you could clap back in a way or retort back at them, but I think where this is most effective is if you are punching up and not down, right?
Mhm.
Like if somebody came to your tweet or your content to just say something like, "Oh, you're stupid and I hate this." And then you clap back, like that would be punching up. But if someone came to your page to disagree with what you're saying and you happen to not like it, that's different, right? That's not necessarily trolling. It's just a difference of opinion. So kind of being mindful of those nuances. Um, and I think it's also just the last thing I would say here too is um, when it comes to the type of behavior that happens on your page or your profile, I think for the most part, you kind of receive what you attract or what you put out there. You
Yeah.
receive what you put out there, right? Because the content you're putting out serves as a sort of beacon or a lighthouse and it attracts the like-minded people. That's usually what happens. Again, I know trolls can happen. They're not as common, but if you are, pure of heart and posting about the things that you know well, um, and posting about it in a way that is meant to help other people, like, "Oh, I, have spent 5 years in marketing and I learned how to do influencer marketing really well. Here are some tips for how you can start your own influencer program." Like something like that is not very likely to get a lot of hate because you're
Yeah.
helping in earnest. And I think you'll find that more people will reciprocate that than they will provide hate speech on your page. So that's one thing. So that's why I say it's kind of rare to see hate or to see trolls because for the most part you will attract what you put out.
Yeah. I mean, I've made my living in television, and people would comment about what I was wearing or my weight or, other parts of me and this. And I often think if you took the time to pause your day to comment on like my clothes, I think this is a far bigger commentary on you
Mm.
than it is ever on what it is that I put out in the world. So
Oh
I've just sort
gosh.
of built a little bit of Teflon around that because it's actually screaming volumes about the other person.
Oh, completely agree. But I would love to pose a question to you about
Yeah.
so, you've spent this career in broadcast news on TV, very different from online.
Yeah.
How has your experience been in terms of how, you've dealt with those types of trolls on TV versus online? How is it different now?
Yeah, I used to thankfully, when you're working for a big network, you're sort of it was I started when Twitter was not there. So it's not like there was that real-time feedback of people saying stuff to you. It was much
Mhm.
later in my career where all the social media platforms came up and people started writing. I think I came to terms very early with the fact that this was more about them than they were about me. I used to host a Saturday morning show, and I used to get a lot of comments that were just, like just not at all related to the content that I was actually putting out there. And I asked the producer very specifically, I'm like, I'm here to do one job and I want to do it well. And this to me is a distraction. So from now on, I don't want any of these comments. I'm going to come in, I'm going to bat 1,000 every single time, but I don't need to this stuff. And if you, the person that is my target audience, i.e., the person who's hired me, decides that I no longer am worthy of this job, then let's have that discussion. But all these other people who are really just putting their stuff on me because I'm an easy mark, I'm there out in the public eye and I'm an easy target, I'm not really interested.
Mhm.
I'm really not interested. And so, many, many years later now, I'm not doing television anymore. I've left it to run my business full time. But, I'm astounded by how many people still come up to me and say how inspirational it was to see representation on the screen and to see someone that looked like them, talked like them on screen. And I had no idea because I was just in a silo. And that's the benefit of doing television is you're talking to a camera. It's very
Yeah.
different than talking to a live audience where people are giving you feedback in real time. They're on their phone, they're talking to their friend, they're walking out of the room. I would wager that speaking in front of a live audience is incredibly harder because that feedback is subtle, it's nuanced, and it's right in front of you. Whereas with television, you've got the benefit of being very insulated because I would go into a closed circuit studio, I would tape what I needed to tape, and then I was out the door.
Mhm.
And so that's my answer. I don't know if that's the answer that
Yeah.
you're looking
No,
for.
no, I think that's fascinating. I think the other thing is what's also interesting about, TV versus the sort of internet niches in which I am in, right?
Yeah,
Is, when you're on TV, any random person is watching you, random person from any walk of life. They're watching you, they're reacting to what they see. They are like they probably have a cuckoo attitude about how to treat people.
right.
But I think when you are playing in an internet niche, right? Where like in my case of like content marketing, I'm talking to other content marketers or small business leaders, and those are pretty specific audiences.
Yeah,
And I people who see my content are not likely to be the random average American Joe who's like, "Oh, what's this? I hate it." Because they
right,
they just they just don't see my content. And I
right,
think that's why when I say like I think trolling is pretty rare, it's because when we are talking about our specific things in our industries, we're just not likely to attract um the average common denominator person, right? We're more
right.
likely to attract other people like us in some capacity who, even if they don't like what we have to say, they're probably more likely to just move on and keep
Right.
scrolling.
I remember seeing statistics where they
Mhm.
ranked like the IQ level of people that are engaging in different platforms, and Facebook, unfortunately, was at the lowest. And then there was Instagram, and then there was LinkedIn, and the smartest people are on Twitter.
Oh,
And this is just
interesting.
the numbers don't lie, right? The IQ level, like Twitter and LinkedIn, were the highest ranking.
Hmm.
Zeal Shah asks, what do you recommend for those that often get analysis paralysis when they're about to post something? They're essentially getting the equivalent of stage fright.
Yeah. Um, I would say if your audience is still on the smaller side, one way to look at that is if you just tweet or if you just publish what you set out to say, just do it. You could make the case that if people don't see it, then they don't see it, and there's nothing to be afraid of. Like if it doesn't hit, um, you're not going to get people saying, "Oh, this is horrible and I hate this." More likely, you're just going to get people who don't notice it or who don't see it, which is a lot less scary than fielding, more inflammatory responses. So I would say to just go for it. As long as you are saying what you believe is true, like you're from your own lived experience or what you've experienced or what you've studied, it's defensible in of itself, and you should go for it.
I have a YouTube channel and I work with an SEO person who kind of explained to me how he went from 1 to 2,000 and then he went from 2 to 10,000 and then he went from 10 to 20,000.
Mm.
And he laid it out that there was a different strategy at each of those benchmarks. Would you argue that that's the same for you as you went from 20,000 to 40,000 to 60,000?
Oh, that's super interesting. I think so, but I think everybody's different. I think there are some people who, as their audience grows, they still stick with the script of, "I'm just going to tweet about my niche." However, an issue with doing that is you could grow your following to, like, 100,000 people and who all whom want, that specific expertise from you, your expertise about, you know, Web3 related content, I don't know, right? But if you wanted to veer away from that and talk about other stuff, then you're sort of at risk of people not wanting that, right? Like if you built your 100,000 person following on crypto and Web3 and suddenly you decided you wanted to write about sales,
Yeah.
like all that audience would be very confused and they would be unlikely to want to engage with your content. So, I would say like whatever it is you do, be mindful of the type of engagement you want to receive and sort of create your content based on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There are a lot of women that'll say, "Oh, I'm afraid to put myself out there." And I say that your content can fall in 3 buckets. You repost something, an article that you liked,
Mm.
but don't post it just carte blanche. Make sure that you've got your 3 sort of pieces of that article that resonated for you, so you're putting your stamp on it.
Mhm.
I think the second thing is to, of course, generate your own. And then there's, the elite level where you're doing this, right? Where we're doing interviews like this, generating our own content both on video and audio. Um, where does the beginner start?
I would say the beginner could start with maybe think about I really like the idea though of using your social media um to make your job hunt more to make your job hunt more like make it easier.
Mhm.
Right? So how can you avoid a traditional job hunt again? And then treating your social media platform accordingly. So let's say you are using Twitter to create career opportunities for yourself. Then I would say start with your resume, right? Like look at your resume, look at all the great KPIs that you have on your resume, all those incredible business outcomes that you helped achieve, and then start thinking about how you can tell the stories behind
Mm.
those KPIs. Like you could say, I brought in, I grew business by 12% quarter over quarter. I don't know, right? What are some of the stories that the experiences that you had or the strategies you drove that led to that kind of outcome, And that's where I think like that's when those threads can come in handy. Could be like, from the perspective of our business was tanking and I did this one thing that brought us 1,000 new leads that very same month,
Mhm.
right? Stuff like that. And that becomes you sort of communicating to potential employers at scale, like the things that you're awesome at, what you're good at, how a good worker you are, but then also having fun with it, right? Like, and that's where it also comes into play, where you can comment on other people's content, right? Offer recommendations for things, or could say something funny if you're funny. um, but yeah, but I would say sort of it is start at your resume and think about the stories you can tell that support the outcomes that you've very deservedly bragged about.
This person asked, there's some masterful people that are role models to follow on LinkedIn. And so for your space or any space, are there any people that are doing it right that are worth looking at?
Um, I really like content from Caitlin Burgoyne, the
Okay.
founder of Customer Camp. She's, to me, she's one of the experts in marketing psychology or buyer psychology. So I learn a
Mhm.
lot from her. Of course, my boss, Rand Fishkin, who writes about the interesting day to day from being a startup founder, right? Whether it's about marketing or about product market fit or sales or things in the tech space. Um, I also really like um, content from my friend Stu Hillhouse.
Mhm.
Stu runs content over at a company called Mutiny, and he writes about content marketing. And he's on the front lines every day, running a blog and doing what content marketing managers do. So I like getting his perspective of somebody who's on the front lines of content. But those are just a few that come to mind.
I had a member ask this morning, she couldn't be at this talk, but she is struggling. She's got a health and wellness business, but she herself is not doing well because she works in the ER of one of the biggest hospitals in America. And as you can imagine, the ER is quite the stressful place to be given what's happened in the last 2 years. So she's like, I feel like a hypocrite going to market talking rah rah wellness when in fact I'm not well. So my immediate thought went to, well, take us on the journey. You're on the journey yourself. Like, who better to learn from than someone that's actually on the journey? So I'll put that question to you. Like, how do you blog well on either Twitter or LinkedIn and take somebody on the journey with you?
Hmm. I mean, I think about it like the people I'm writing for, I feel like are the people who are maybe just 2 steps behind me, who kind of just need the extra push or the extra information to find their edge. So I
Mm.
think about it as like, what can I say or write that will help the version of me from last year? Or the person who is trying to grow their SaaS business from 0 to 1. Like,
Mm.
the people who like, things that speak to the experiences that I've recently had. Um, that's how I think about that, is, like, how can I use the what can I say that can be helpful to someone who needs this solution?
So that can be a frame that you can use when you're stuck. And to Zeal's point, and you're getting analysis paralysis on what to post.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean, important to remember that we all truly, all of us have expertise that someone else does not have,
Mhm.
and I think we also need to trust ourselves and know that we are good at our jobs, we're good at what we do, and to keep writing for that because people deserve to hear from us.
Well, Amanda, we're coming up on the hour here. What is it that I should have asked you that I didn't ask you when it comes to building a social media audience?
Oh gosh. Um, let's see. I am trying to think. Uh, Maybe we could have talked about, how about the notion of, is audience building even, is it icky? Like, is there something gross about it? um,
Well,
what's
said
gross?
another way, that people
Mhm,
always often say to me, I don't like being salesy. It really
mhm.
turns me off. So I don't want to be that. So is that another way of saying what you just said?
I think so. Yeah, I think when sometimes when people think about audience building or growing their following or whatever it is, there's that reflexive feeling of like that's gross or like that's salesy, that's scammy. But I think it's important to reframe some of how we think about that. Like, or it's like saying people are worried about, it sounds like I just want to be famous or I just want status. Um, but I would encourage people to kind of take some time to think about what it is that feels icky. Does it feel salesy? Does it feel like you're status seeking or that you're fame seeking? Um, or does it feel like you just want to go viral all the time, right? So I would encourage people to think about, okay, what are the things that you have a problem with, and how can you shift your mindset about it? So the notion of salesy, is it salesy, or do you want to just be more confident online? That's a
Mhm.
completely valid feeling. And it's something that I think people should think about. Like, it's not about being salesy, it's about being confident in yourself and the way you communicate. Or it's not about being status seeking or fame seeking. It's more about how can you create meaningful connections with people at scale. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And then finally, when you think about, the ickiness of, oh, I don't want to just be someone who goes viral. You don't have to. You could think about it as, it's not that you want to go viral all the time or have all your tweets get 50,000 likes. Maybe it's just that you want your ideas to resonate with people, with which as large of a group of people as possible. Like, when I say, I'll kind of wrap up with an example of, like, I posted some Twitter thread about, I think, people management, and there was an error in the way that I posted it, and it was a broken thread. It was like some Twitter functionality that was broken, and as a result, it only got a couple of likes, and I was kind of bothered, and I deleted it. And a friend of mine was like, "Why do you even care so much? Like, it's just Twitter. Get over it. Like, come on." And I understood that perspective of, yeah, I get it. Like, it's just a, online interaction. But what bothered me was, no, I'm bothered because I had something to say that I feel is important and I wanted people to see it because this thing that I said matters, and
Mhm.
I want people to hear about it from me. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being disappointed when you feel like you have something meaningful to say and it doesn't hit, or it doesn't reach a wide audience of people. Now, don't get too down about it, I would say. But I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting your ideas to find people.
Mhm. I like what you said. It's sharing your ideas and doing it at scale.
Mhm.
And I actually often say to my students, I have a master class, is that if you can flip the paradigm from boasting to educating, what's up here is coming out here and really be in service. I think that's the paradigm shift that most people don't see.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is a question you want to ask me before we wrap up?
Oh my gosh. Um, is there anything you miss about being in working in television or in broadcast?
I still get pulled in from time to time to do it. I
Yeah.
haven't dropped it completely. I do
Mhm.
not miss getting up at 2:30 in the morning
Oh, yeah.
because that was all through my 20s and 30s, and that is very hard living in a place like New York City, having to go to bed early. I think it's perfect if you have children, you're going to bed at 7. But I think there's a great adrenaline rush that comes with the performance aspect of television.
Mm.
I truly love business news because everyone's always going to care about their money. And I was specifically interested in the science and the technology that went into explaining it, which is why I chose that. And so for me, I loved that every day I got to talk about stuff I cared about, but I
Mhm.
also wrote everything I said. And that was truly the deal breaker, is that I got to write in service of others. And the bonus was that I got to deliver it. Once I started doing morning TV, of course, so much of that is chat. And you just get to chat in the way that you and I are chatting right now. And you get to do that at scale. So I
Mhm.
think that that piece is missing, but I'm doing that in my own way. And now I own the entire ecosystem and I can build my own following, which is what, a lot of people, and they're like, well, how can I get on TV? I'm like, all the tools that you need today to build a
Mhm.
following and are produced, through your phone. You need somebody in an ivory tower deeming you worthy of being on any kind of channel. You can build that own following and the media will come find you. So I think there's real proof of concept, and the power struggles have really been put in our own hands. It's about how much you're going to show up and how consistent you're going to be.
Oh, absolutely. That's the other thing too with doing this online for yourself. It becomes like you it kind of all rests on you, right? How consistent will you be? How prolific will you be? It kind of comes down to, what are you willing to do?
Right. Amanda, if people want to work with you, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Best way to get in touch with me is through Twitter. I'm on Twitter as at Amanda Nat. I also have a personal site and newsletter at amandanat.com.
So
So,
I'm going to
yeah.
put that up here just for everyone's benefit. It's Amanda Nat. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So it's this.
Yes.
Awesome. And that's on Twitter.
That's on Twitter.
All right. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I run the Women's Leadership Lab. I have a mastermind for women leaders who are at that critical inflection point and they need the support, the accountability, the group around it to get to their goals. And you can always email me at joya@joyadas.com. Amanda, this has been great. We went 55 minutes and I don't even think we got through all the questions.
This was so much fun. Thank you for having me, Joya. This was great.
Enjoy the sunshine today and we'll see you soon.
All right. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.